Under the harsh afternoon sun, Mark came across something that made him stop in his tracks. A dog stuck deep in the mud, quietly whimpering. His heart sank as he moved closer and noticed a collar around its neck. Hands shaking a bit, he brushed off the dirt on the tag and froze. "It's a police K9?" he muttered. Mark quickly looked around, hoping to spot an officer nearby, but there was no one, just him and the dog. After only a few minutes standing there, he could feel the sun burning into his skin. He grabbed his water bottle, and when the dog looked up at him with tired, pleading eyes, he instantly knew it was thirsty too. He had no clue how long the dog had been trapped or how long it had gone without water. Mark crouched down and poured a little water into his hand, holding it close to the dog's mouth so it could drink. As the dog began to lick it up, Mark knew he couldn't walk away. Once the dog had some water, Mark tried pulling it free, but it was tougher than he thought. The mud clung to the dog like glue, and each tug just seemed to bury it deeper. The dog whined, shifting a little, but nothing helped. He needed another idea. There was no way he could leave it now. Then something clicked. He had spare clothes, a belt, and some shoes with laces in his car trunk. Maybe he could tie them together and make a kind of rope? He dashed to his car and got to work. It wasn't the best setup, and he wasn't sure it would hold, but he had to try. Once the makeshift rope was ready, he rushed back and gently wrapped it around the dog, digging into the mud to get under its legs and make it secure. It was time to pull. His arms were caked in mud, and his hands were slick, so he wiped them on his jeans. He planted his feet firmly and took a deep breath. Then he started pulling, slowly at first, then with more strength, and to his surprise, the dog began to shift. Little by little, the dog inched its way out, and after a few minutes, it finally came free. Mark nearly lost his balance as it popped out of the mud. The dog was exhausted and breathing heavily, but it was safe. Mark quickly offered more water, but a new worry started to creep in. Where was its handler? K9 dogs usually stick close to their officers. They don't just end up alone like this. A chill ran down Mark's spine. Did something happen to the officer? He started searching nearby, checking behind bushes and trees, but there wasn't a single clue. It was like the dog had just appeared out of nowhere. There was only one thing left to do. Mark had to call the police. Looking down at the dog while dialing 911, he wondered how he'd explain everything. "911, what's your emergency?" came the voice. He paused. Yeah, I found a K9 stuck in the mud," he said. The dispatcher didn't quite follow, so he tried again. "I pulled a police dog out of the mud. I'm in the woods, and there's no one else around," he explained. "Can you send someone, maybe a police officer or animal control?" That seemed to make sense. The dispatcher asked for his address, which he didn't know exactly, but he gave her clear directions to the spot. After he hung up the phone, Mark didn't feel any better. He had no idea if the police or animal control were actually coming. The good thing was that the dog was out of the mud now, so at least they could wait somewhere cooler. The dog still looked weak, so Mark gently lifted it up and carried it over to a large tree nearby for some shade. They sat together under the tree, waiting for what felt like forever. Mark kept petting the dog and offering it little sips of water from his bottle, but it was almost empty now. He had more water in the car, but that was his backup stash, only meant for real emergencies. Eventually, the dog dozed off, probably worn out from everything, while Mark kept watch. He checked the time over and over, but every glance felt like the clock had barely moved. The minutes dragged by, and Mark's patience was wearing thin. He shifted around, uncomfortable on the warm ground. The dog stayed curled up beside him, sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of how restless Mark was getting. The sun shifted, stretching out the shadows, but no one showed up. Even sitting in the shade, the heat was still getting to him. Mark made up his mind. If no one came in 30 minutes, he'd leave. Sweat trickled down his forehead, and he wiped it off, looking over at the sleeping dog. 30 minutes, he whispered, setting a timer on his watch. If help didn't show by then, he'd have to figure something out himself. 30 minutes passed, and still no one came. Mark stood up, scooped the dog back into his arms, and walked to the car. The dog barely stirred, still fast asleep. With a small sigh, Mark gently placed it in the passenger seat. Before getting in, he looked back toward the trees one last time, feeling both frustrated and sure of what he had to do. Inside the car, he turned on the air conditioning. The cool air felt like a lifesaver after all that time outside. The dog shifted slightly in its sleep, breathing more calmly now in the cooler air. Mark adjusted the vents to blow gently toward the dog, wanting to make sure it was as comfortable as possible during the ride back. Mark drove straight to the police station, not stopping anywhere along the way. When he walked in, holding the dog close to his chest, a few officers turned to look. He walked straight ahead with purpose, the tired dog resting quietly in his arms. As he approached the front desk, his face was set. He was ready to find out what had happened and get the dog the help it needed. "I think this belongs to you," Mark said as he gently placed the muddy dog on the receptionist's desk. The dog was still out cold, but slowly began to stir. Mark placed it down carefully, not wanting to startle it. The dog blinked a few times, trying to make sense of its new surroundings. The receptionist looked completely caught off guard by what just happened. Her eyes darted from the dog to Mark and back again, unsure of how to respond. She fiddled with her pen, clearly flustered and hoping someone else would step in to deal with it. Thankfully, a nearby officer walked over and asked what was going on. Mark took a moment, then calmly started explaining everything, from finding the dog stuck in the mud to carrying it all the way here. The officer listened closely, nodding as Mark talked, clearly trying to piece the whole thing together. Once Mark mentioned it was a K9, the officer's expression changed. "We don't use that breed for our K9s, he said, sounding a little surprised. His brow furrowed as he looked around the station. "That's strange," he added, clearly confused. Mark was taken aback. If the dog didn't belong to this station, finding its handler was going to be even tougher. "Is there a system or something where you can look up who it belongs to?" he asked, still hopeful for some kind of lead. The officer gave a small shake of his head and shrugged. "Sorry, man, I don't think we can help you," he said before turning and walking off. Mark stood there, stunned for a moment, but he wasn't ready to give up that easily. Just then, the dog, now more alert, jumped off the desk and gave a strong shake, sending mud flying. It barked loudly, directing its voice right at the officer walking away. The sound was sharp and sudden, and Mark couldn't help but look over in surprise. What really caught his attention, though, was how the dog seemed to recognize that particular officer. It didn't react to the receptionist or any of the others walking by, only him. Mark narrowed his eyes, uneasy. Something about it felt off, like there was a part of the story still hidden from view. "You sure you don't recognize this dog?" Mark asked one last time. That question seemed to hit a nerve. The officer's whole mood shifted. What had started as annoyance now turned into irritation, like he felt Mark was accusing him of something. The air grew tense between them. The officer suddenly snapped. His voice was sharp as he told Mark to leave and gave him a push toward the door. Mark didn't argue. He walked out with the dog beside him, glancing back once, feeling frustrated but not ready to give up just yet. Determined to keep trying, Mark drove to a nearby town to ask their police department. He stayed focused, hoping someone in this new place might recognize the dog, or at least point him in the right direction. He was tired, but he wasn't stopping now. Unfortunately, no one there had any idea who the dog belonged to. One officer after another shook their head, and Mark's hope started to fade. He thanked them anyway, but inside he was discouraged. It was starting to feel like finding the dog's owner might not be possible. With the sun starting to set, Mark decided to head home and let the dog stay with him for the night. He didn't have any other plan for now, but at least he could give it a safe place to rest. He drove quietly, the day's exhaustion catching up to him. Back at home, Mark gave the dog a proper cleaning and got ready for bed. He was worn out from the long day. The dog seemed calmer now, maybe sensing it was finally safe. Mark climbed into bed, physically tired, but mentally still thinking through everything that had happened. The next morning, Mark woke up feeling more refreshed and ready to keep going. He didn't know what the day would bring, but he felt more clear-headed and focused. He had made it this far, and he wasn't stopping until he found out the truth about this dog. Now that the dog was clean, Mark looked again at the collar. It definitely said K9, but now he noticed something else. A name. Ollie. His eyebrows lifted. That had to mean something. Maybe this was the piece he'd been missing all along. He looked over at the dog and asked, "Is your name Ollie?" The moment he said it, the dog's ears perked up. Mark blinked, surprised. That little reaction told him everything he needed to know. "Ollie," he repeated, smiling a little. For the first time, things were starting to make sense. It felt like a step forward, but Mark still had no clue how he'd ever track down the dog's owner. Even though he now knew the dog's name, Ollie, it didn't bring him much closer to finding where he came from. Still, Mark wasn't ready to give up. He was determined to keep trying, no matter how long it took. He decided to post a photo of Ollie on Facebook, along with a description of what had happened. With his hands hovering over the keyboard, Mark typed out a heartfelt message. He included everything: how he found the dog, how he helped him out of the mud, and that he was hoping someone out there might recognize Ollie and help get him home. After hitting post, Mark felt a bit more hopeful, but he still wanted to do more. So he grabbed his keys and headed back to the place in the woods where he had first found Ollie. As he got closer, that same feeling of urgency returned. Maybe he had missed something the first time. As soon as they arrived, Ollie perked up. He started sniffing the ground, then let out a few soft whines while heading in a specific direction. Mark's eyes followed him, feeling his heart rate speed up. It was like Ollie was remembering something, like his instincts were kicking in again. Mark didn't hesitate. He trusted Ollie's training and let him lead the way, stepping quickly to keep up. Whatever had brought Ollie to that spot, Mark believed the dog could help them get answers. They walked together through the trees, the silence between them full of meaning. They moved deeper into the forest, even leaving the trail at one point. But Ollie didn't hesitate. He clearly knew where he was going. Branches brushed past as they walked through the undergrowth, and Mark followed, amazed by the dog's confidence. It was like he had a destination in mind all along. About 15 minutes in, Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced down and saw almost 20 new notifications from Facebook. He stopped for a moment, caught off guard by the sudden flood of alerts. The quiet of the forest was quickly interrupted by the sounds of online activity. He scrolled through the comments, reading them one by one, hoping someone had recognized Ollie. But no one had. They were all just kind messages from people worried about the dog and praising Mark for helping. It was kind, but it didn't bring any real answers. Even with all the concern from kind strangers online, Mark still didn't have the one thing he needed, the answer to who Ollie really belonged to. When he looked up from his phone, Mark's stomach dropped. Ollie was gone. Panic hit instantly. He spun around, heart pounding, scanning the forest that now felt unfamiliar without the dog nearby. A knot formed in his gut as the fear sank in. Ollie had vanished. Mark started calling out, spinning in circles, looking everywhere. He checked behind trees, through brush, calling Ollie's name over and over. Every little sound, leaves rustling, branches cracking, made him think Ollie was near, only to realize it wasn't him. The silence after each false hope made it worse. He couldn't believe it. How could he lose Ollie again? Maybe the dog had picked up a familiar scent and chased after it. That thought offered a bit of hope, but also more fear. What if Ollie had gone somewhere dangerous? Mark's mind swirled with worry, frustration, and self-doubt. Just as Mark was about to turn back toward the car, a gunshot rang out. He froze, every sense on edge. Then he heard it. Ollie's whine. Mark's chest tightened. Without a second thought, he ran toward the sound, crashing through bushes, heart racing like a drum. He reached the area fast and found Ollie hiding behind a bush, tail tucked tightly under, trembling. Relief hit Mark like a wave. He dropped to his knees, reaching out gently to comfort the scared dog. "Hey, hey, it's okay. I'm here," he said softly, brushing dirt off Ollie's fur. Ollie was clearly shaken, and Mark's relief quickly turned into anger. Who had fired that shot, and why would anyone shoot near a dog? He stayed close to Ollie, speaking quietly and calmly, trying to ease the fear in the dog's eyes while wondering what had just happened out here. Mark stood up and shouted, "Hello? Who's there?" His voice echoed through the trees. A shape shifted in the distance. Someone was there, moving behind a tree. Mark squinted, trying to get a better look, every muscle in his body tense. Then a voice shouted back, "Get that dog out of here!" It came from a man hidden in the trees, but Mark couldn't make out his face. Just a silhouette. The man's tone was sharp and cold, and something about it made the hairs on Mark's neck stand up. With his brow furrowed, Mark kept his eyes on the shadowy figure ahead, uneasy at the thought that this could turn into something serious. His instincts told him to stay alert. He didn't know who this man was or what he might do. Mark called out, asking the man about the gunshot. The reply came quickly. Yes, it was him, but he said he hadn't meant to shoot at Ollie. Mark's stomach still felt tight, but he pressed for more answers. His voice stayed steady, even though the situation was tense. "I thought it was a deer," the man said, as he slowly stepped out from behind the tree. As soon as his face came into view, Ollie's tail began to wag. The moment brought a wave of relief to Mark. Some of the pressure lifted. It was clear the dog knew this man, and that helped settle the air between them. The man was dressed head to toe in camouflage and carried a large rifle. "What are you doing with my dog?" he asked, his tone sharp. Mark felt his heart beat faster. He hadn't expected this, and now he had to find the right words, fast. It was clear now, Ollie belonged to him. Trying to stay calm, Mark explained the whole story, from finding Ollie in the mud to trying to locate his owner. At the end, he added, "You don't look like a police officer." The words weren't meant to accuse, but it was something he had to say. The collar had thrown him off from the beginning. The man gave a short laugh and let out a whistle. Ollie immediately ran to him. "Ollie's not a real K9, he said with a grin. "That collar? I just found it one day." Mark blinked in surprise, then let out a breath. So that was it. The mystery of the K9 collar finally made sense. The man went on to explain that he was a hunter and lived out in the woods. He'd found Ollie as a pup and had raised him since. A while later, he'd come across the collar and just put it on him. Mark listened closely, piecing together the rest of the puzzle. The hunter added that Ollie had disappeared earlier that day and hadn't come back. He'd started to worry something had happened. Hearing that, Mark felt a wave of sympathy. He could see it now, the concern in the man's face, the quiet relief in his voice. Mark felt a deep sense of peace knowing he had found Ollie's owner, and even more thankful that he'd gone back to the forest that day. Watching Ollie reunite with the man brought a quiet happiness that filled his chest. As the two stood together again, Mark smiled, reminded of how strong the bond between people and animals can be. He said goodbye to Ollie and the hunter, feeling a mix of emotions. It was hard to leave, but he knew their journey together had come to an end. With one last look back through the trees, Mark turned toward the path home, carrying with him memories he knew he'd never forget. Once he got home, Mark opened Facebook to update everyone who had followed Ollie's story. He typed out the full ending, explaining how he'd found the hunter and how Ollie wasn't a K9 after all, just a good dog with an unusual collar. As he hit post, he hoped the story might make someone else's day a little brighter, too. Mark never saw the hunter again, but Ollie often came to mind. Sometimes it was just a flash, a moment of quiet when he'd think of the forest, the mud, the bark. Those memories stayed with him, tucked away like a small gift, reminding him of a day that started out ordinary, but became something so much more. From that day on, Mark made himself a promise. If someone, or something, needed help, he wouldn't look away. He'd seen what it meant to show up for someone in trouble. That lesson stuck with him. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about being there. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You never know, your click might help this story reach someone who needs it today.